Welcome, everybody, to Behind the Masterpiece, produced by our friends at Visit Sarasota County. I am your host, Brian Hersh, the CEO of the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota County. And with me today is the music director and co-founder of the Chamber Orchestra of Sarasota, Maestro Robert Vodnoy. Maestro Robert, welcome to the Behind the Masterpiece.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here with you.
It's great to have you here. I love talking about arts and culture in Sarasota. I love highlighting what we have in this community, and Chamber Orchestra is pretty cool.
It is. It's really an amazing community in many ways, but the artistic side of it is just astonishing.
So let's jump in. Let's talk about, for those who somehow don't know now, listen, I'm lucky. I've actually performed in chamber orchestras in my day to an extent. It's taken me all over the world. But for those who don't know what a chamber orchestra is, hasn't seen one before, what is a chamber orchestra and how might it differ from, say, a full symphony or something like that?
Right. As to be very etymological about it, orchestra is the noun, and chamber orchestra is the adjective. So a symphony orchestra means an orchestra, which is an ensemble of instrumental musicians that play symphonies, basically. Chamber orchestra means an orchestra that plays in a smaller space than a symphony hall would be, and plays music that is more intimate, put it that way. So a chamber orchestra can be as little as 10, 12 people, and about tops out around 30 or 35. After that, you're starting to feel like you're a symphony orchestra.
Excellent. So this is great stuff. Chamber Orchestra of Sarasota. And by the way, you can always go to chamberorchestrasarasota.org to get more information on this great organization. So before we talk into what helped you create this, everyone has a Sarasota story. How did you get to Sarasota? What drew you to Sarasota to help create this orchestra?
Yeah, well, my sister, Lori Vodnoy Wright, is a longtime Florida resident and longtime Sarasota resident, and she's a violinist. So my wife, Kayla, and I were down here visiting somewhere around 2016. And she said, you should start a chamber orchestra here. And I said, that's a lovely idea. But at that time, I was the music director and professor of history and strings at Northern State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota. And I was also the music director, and still am the music director, of the Whiting Park Festival Orchestra, which is in Northwest Indiana near Chicago. So I said, why do you think I need 3 orchestras? And she said, that's the wrong question. I said, okay, I'll bite. What's the right question? She said, well, what are you going to do when you retire from your university job?
Okay.
Isn't it cold in South Dakota? And I said, okay, that's a good question. So we did a kind of focus group wine and cheese party in July of 17. And Lori said no one will come because it's the middle of the summer. And she was wrong. 50 people showed up and said, go for it. So that's how we started.
Love it.
This is now the 8th season.
Congrats, Mazel Tov. Amazing things to be able to keep that going, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I hear that our weather is a little different than South Dakota and Indiana. I've spent some time in the Midwest in Indiana.
Yeah, I mean, it was uncommon to have 20 below zero mornings in South Dakota, and the snow was on the ground until May.
Yeah.
So,
hey, and not great for our instruments, right? All those big, harsh climates, we don't love those sorts of things.
And dry.
Yeah.
Very dry. My violin hated it there.
See? So listen, Sarasota was in the cards for you. We're so glad. So you talked about, a little bit why. How did you found, or what made you want to build and start this chamber orchestra? But you told us a little bit about that. So it's a way to get you down here. But what helps differentiate this orchestra, this chamber orchestra that you have in this really amazing, robust cultural scene? What helps the chamber orchestra stand out?
Well, actually, the thing that makes it stand out is actually the same. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this, because, so you probably don't know this, but February 2025 will be the 50th anniversary of my debut, professional debut.
Cool.
And for my career up until the chamber orchestra here, I almost exclusively conducted symphony orchestras with big pieces: Verdi Requiem, Carmina Burana, Mahler 5.
Yeah.
So the chamber orchestra repertoire, I mean, there's some pieces which I have done before, because you can do them with small and big orchestras. But it's exciting new repertoire for me.
Yeah.
So that was really one of the draws, is to explore a whole new repertoire of music.
Listen, I think you're defining what people do in Sarasota, and that's to push and explore. It's not, I'm always pleased that no one comes to Sarasota to just chill out in a little bit. Maybe they want to relax for this great weather, but people are active. You are demonstrating that too. So what excites you about the chamber orchestra repertoire? What sort of things, before we even get into your season, what's exciting to you about the chamber orchestra repertoire that's really kind of given a little bit of fire for you over these last few years?
Well, actually, part of the feeling of conducting is different, because when you're standing in front of an orchestra of 80 or 90 people, it feels different than when you're standing in front of a group of 12 or 15 people. There's a relationship and a rapport between conductor and musicians, which is really which is more intimate and more integrated and responsive. And the same thing applies for the audience, because it's one thing to sit in as thrilling as it is to sit in an auditorium with 2,000 other people, but it's pretty nice, pretty exciting to sit in a smaller hall where there's 300-400 people and a small ensemble, and you're not more than 50 feet from the stage. So you can really see the musicians, and the sound feels very immediate too. So that's certainly one part of it. This is going to sound funny, because we're opening our season on December 5th with our annual holiday concert. So I've become a kind of mild little expert on Baroque Christmas concertos. I had no idea. I mean, I knew the Corelli Christmas concerto.
Yeah.
We all know that, but there's Schiazzi and Freibert and Manfredini, and I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Every court composer wrote Christmas concertos, and they're all magnificent.
How cool! So we have years and years of great repertoire left in Sarasota.
We'll never run out of those. That's for sure.
No, this is wonderful. Listen, everyone, you're listening to Robert Vodnoy, the music director of Chamber Orchestra of Sarasota, and I am Brian Hersh, CEO of the Arts and Cultural Alliance, as you tune into Behind the Masterpiece here with our friends from Visit Sarasota. You can always find out information as well about all that Sarasota has to offer by going to visitsarasota.com. Robert, this is a professional chamber orchestra, and I think this is really, really important to talk about. So how do you both select those musicians that you so closely mentioned about making sure that there's a great relationship between the conductor and the musicians? How do you select the musicians, and how in turn then do you also select the program and the pieces?
Okay, two good questions. So the musicians first. One of the wonderful things about Sarasota is there are so many professional musicians here, and a lot of professional music ensembles in the whole area: Sarasota Orchestra, Florida Orchestra, Venice Symphony, and through a little bit of magic of scheduling, which you can imagine, those players want to play with us. Many of them are friends of my sister, who played here for 25 years, so she knows a lot of people. And then, of course, once you start connecting, we find new people too. Um, but that's who the players are. They're the players you might hear in the pit at the Sarasota Opera, or on the stage at Van Wezel, or in at the Florida Orchestra. They come from all over the place, um, and because we are a professional chamber orchestra, when they can fit us into their schedule, they're eager to do it
Wonderful.
because they really like the repertoire. And I want to back up just a second on that because we talked. I mentioned the Baroque Christmas concertos, but we also play a lot of romantic and contemporary music. We played Jesse Montgomery, a piece by Jesse Montgomery, who's the
Mm-hmm.
was the resident composer in Chicago. We premiered a piece by Michael Shelley a couple of years ago, and this year, very excitingly, we're doing the Florida premiere of a work by Victoria Bond, based on the Diary of Anne Frank. It's called Anne Frank's Tree. Fabulous, fabulous, brand new piece. It was played in Indianapolis in January. This will be the second performance. So we do the whole, the whole waterfront.
Yeah. I think it's amazing when you talk about that whole waterfront because chamber orchestra and concert music here is not just a museum piece. These are pieces that are living and breathing, and really, frankly, even pieces from the past. When you play with live musicians, it gives life to that as well. And I'm sure you sort of feel that. Is that how are you thinking of these sort of things as you program the season?
Oh, it's a collection of composers I know, pieces that I've always wanted to do. Um, Sometimes composers reach out to me. Um, the Michael Shelley work that we premiered a couple of years ago. He's a longtime colleague of mine from Indiana. Um, he was entering a sabbatical year, and he just reached out and said, "I'm writing a brand new piece. Would you like to premiere it?" So it comes in from all different ways. Another wonderful thing about this chamber orchestra is that we're really able to present very, very extraordinary soloists. So in December, the magnificent soprano Hannah Brammer, who's been making a huge splash at the Sarasota Opera, she's singing with us. In February, the Ukrainian American composer, pianist Ina Falix is playing the Shostakovich First Piano Concerto with us. We're having auditions. Actually, at the time of this airing, we've already had the auditions for the narrator for the Anne Frank's Tree work by Victoria Bond. Violin soloist on that concert is George Maxman, internationally renowned virtuoso violinist playing the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. So the orchestra is great, and the soloists are great too.
No, we love it. Thank you for taking us through some of those highlights from December and February, and the amazing premiere with the Anne Frank piece as well later in the spring. Some fantastic things that are happening. You're bringing great work. Tell me a little bit. You've talked about the program, but tell us a little bit of how you work with musicians. What's different in a chamber orchestra, and what's the role of the music director and conductor? I think so many people are really mystified by conducting as they see someone up there and like, yes, there are things that do happen in the performance that are important, but so much of the work happens before the performance. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. So actually, that part of the preparation is not so different from what a music director would do with any orchestra.
Sure.
So once I've picked the music, and sometimes I'll in conversation with the players, I'll say, "Hey, so is there a piece you think I really should take a look at?" So once the pieces are picked, um, it's a tried and true process. We order the music gets here. Um, we send the music to the concertmaster, um, who marks bowings. Then we share those with the other principal strings. I stick my nose in a little bit because I'm a violinist, so I look at what say, well, maybe that should be down bow, or I like a slur right there. But and then there's editing. Sometimes composers don't put enough dynamics in. Um, So you mark some of that. And we need to work very thoroughly before, because we actually only have one rehearsal for every concert. So the players come ready to play, and we work through all the pieces. Programs are last between 60 and 75 minutes, so we don't take an intermission. Um, and I introduce the pieces at the concert so that people get, sort of notes from the podium, if you will.
Yeah, it's always nice to speak about and introduce and set a framework. So we know people can get tickets by going to chamberorchestrasarasota.org.
Sure, and if you go to the website, there's a drop-down link that has program notes for all the programs on it, so you can read about the artist and the pieces. There's a drop-down link, of course, where you can order tickets for each of the 3 concerts individually, or you can buy the whole series at a discount. There's the usual stuff. There's some recordings on the website too from past years, videos. So it's a great way to get to know us.
It's a great way to get to know us. It's a great website. Where are these concerts taking place? Where can people find you and hear you?
Oh yeah, well I really want to rave about that place. We play at the First Presbyterian Church of Sarasota, which is at 2050 Oak Street in downtown Sarasota, and it's a really beautiful historic building, mission style architecture. And if you know what a shoebox shape is for a concert hall, long and narrow, that's the best for music. So it's a shoebox shape. And the altar is big enough to hold a chamber orchestra, which is good, and pretty wide open, so we can sit in a normal configuration.
Love that. So talk about that shoebox. Why is that good for music? Why is I love spaces and what that means. So what makes this good for the chamber orchestra?
Well, it's actually good for every orchestra. When the sound is coming off the stage, if it's fan shaped, then the sound spreads out, and the sidewalls, it's harder for the sidewalls to reflect the sound back into the to the listener. Whereas if it's a shoebox shape, straight up and down, then the sound bounces around appropriately. If you go the reverb time is good in there. And another good thing I'm sure audiences will be happy to know is that parking is free and easy. It's right in front of the building. There's the church parking lots, but there's also public parking on the street right in front of the building. So it's easy to get into. It's handicap accessible. So getting in and getting out and the whole listening experience is fantastic. Excellent. This will be our third season in the church.
Thank you for that. People in Sarasota love their parking. I'm, of course, talking to music director of the Chamber Orchestra of Sarasota. That's Robert Vodnoy. I'm Brian Hersh with the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota County. Tell us a little bit more detail about this piece that's coming up in March, Anne Frank's Tree, because I think it's a really interesting way. You've already sort of alluded to that you've got performers and actor as well as live music. So how does this piece work? What are we going to experience in March?
Yeah, well, the origin of the piece comes from Anne's experience living in the annex, because the only thing she could see looking out the window was a hawthorn tree that was just outside the annex window. So she related to that tree and its feeling of hope and life in a very positive and strong way. So Victoria Bond she's a great musician. She's got a big conducting career as well as composition career. She studied with Bernstein and Herbert von Karajan. She's an active conductor now, and it writes just volumes of music. So the narrator introduces each of the 7 movements of the piece. Sometimes they're in silence, and sometimes they're talkovers. But they're direct quotes from the diary. And the orchestra, chamber orchestra, but it's very colorful. It's got solo woodwinds and harp and piano in it. percussion. It's really quite a nice piece. Then I wanted to build. Oh, the reason it was premiered in Indianapolis is because that hawthorn tree, the one that Anne Frank related to, actually got diseased. So the Anne Frank Foundation made sapling cuttings from that tree. And those saplings are planted all over the world, and many around the United States. You can't plant them in Florida, unfortunately, because that tree just won't make it in this climate. But there's a tree in Indianapolis, and that's why the piece was premiered there.
That's a lovely story. Really beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for that, Robert. So let's transition.
Just one more little thought.
Yeah.
I wanted to build a program around it that hung together and made sense. So the opening work is by Erich Korngold, and it's his suite from Much Ado About Nothing, which he wrote in the 1920s before he fled Nazi Germany. And the concluding work is the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. Mendelssohn, of course, was also a band composer. So the pieces relate to each other very well, I think.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have a really tremendous season ahead.
Thank you.
Everyone is really excited. Holiday Cheer is just around the corner on December 5th with your first program of the season there.
By the way, tickets are inexpensive. They're $42 for adults and $5 for students. So
perfect. Sounds like a great way to start the holiday season for many early on there in December. And music director Robert Vodnoy, Chamber Orchestra of Sarasota, and of course chamberorchestrasarasota.org is where you can get tickets as well, and you can listen to Behind the Masterpiece with visitsarasota.com. I am your host of Behind the Masterpiece, Brian Hersh of the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota County. Robert, thanks so much for being on Behind the Masterpiece.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure. Lots of masterpieces indeed at the Chamber Orchestra of Sarasota. Thank you again for tuning in to Behind the Masterpiece. Until next time, see you soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of Behind the Masterpiece, brought to you by Visit Sarasota County. For more and to hear this podcast, go to visitsarasota.com.